Thank you for joining me for episode 160 of the Confidence Through Health podcast. In this episode, I speak with Sudi Barre, and we talk about wellness. She is the founder of Wellness Rain, and she talks about how she wasn't always like her lifelong passion was not to get into wellness and to help people with their health and happiness in holistic ways. But she went through some health issues, and we talk in depth about those and how those helped shape her into who she is today, and how you can take the same information and how to transform your life and become healthier, become a more well-rounded individual, and your well-being will be better off. So I thought it was a great conversation. There's a lot to learn and unpack about how we may be missing the boat on how we do things in our society. And we need to take those moments to back up and think about really what we want, think about really what's going to make each individual happy, but also how we can help make each other happy. And in doing so, I think we move away from what society is having us do and move towards what Sudi talks about with being able to get true wellness and true happiness out of our lives, even when circumstances and our situation may be not exactly ideal. So welcome, Sudi, to the Confidence Through Health podcast.
Thank you.
So I'm really excited to have you on, as I was telling you before we hit record, because I think there's a lot of people out there, whether it's in the corporate world or not, that are just like, they're struggling to find their wellness and they can't figure out how to work it into their life. And that's something that you've done and then are now helping other people learn how to do. And so I think that's why you're a perfect guest to have on, to help people that are just like, I know I should be doing these things, but I just don't know how to start and where to begin. And so tell us a little bit about your story, about how you started and where you began, and why wellness became important to you.
Oh, Jerry, that's a
I know
long
it's a long
question.
question, right?
But I will tell you, it all started like this found me. I didn't find it. I'll say that first
Nice.
because while it started back when I was in university. I was looking for employment that was serving, like I was in
Right.
service of something bigger than
Right.
myself, but at the same time, I wanted flexibility.
Okay.
So that landed me into healthcare,
Mhm.
um, healthcare aid, and caring. Initially, I started with pediatric children that were at end stage illnesses that
Okay.
need their parents need a respite.
Right.
As I was doing that, just within different organizations, transitioned from adults to adults with living with disability or mobility issues that were living independently. And then after university, I really wanted to start a business, but I didn't have the financial resources.
Right.
So a friend came and said, "You know what? I want to start a nonprofit. Why don't you come with me and let's do this and we can start a business together. And the nonprofit will give you the flexibility to generate income,
Hmm.
um, and we'll figure everything out." And I'm like, I'm fresh out of school. I have a lot of debt. I said, yes, yes, yes.
Right.
I didn't have a better prospects. So as that happened, it turned out that what I ended up doing was a lot of advocacy work and
Okay.
health navigation for marginalized populations. And life went on, and the organization grew, and things were growing. I got married. Was getting ready to have a baby, and I was really fit. Like, I was always been a very health conscious person
Right.
because my background is in economics. So health determinants and all these things are always in the forefront of my mind. So uh, things took a left turn.
Yeah.
I went into a low risk delivery hospital because I was a low risk pregnancy and low
Hmm.
risk everything. I had no pre existing illnesses. And then I ended up needing an emergency cesarean. And
Okay.
then shortly after, the next morning, I just couldn't breathe. The back of my neck was hurting, between my shoulders, my left arm, and my attending nurse was like, "You know what? Happens sometimes. Just walk it off, and
Oh
it could be
gosh.
circulation issues." I'm
Okay.
like, "Okay, I don't know. This doesn't sound like good advice."
Right.
So I tried. I just couldn't breathe. So I started pressing for my obstetrician. I'm like, "I need my delivering doctor to come
Mhm.
here because this is something's going and I don't know what it is, but I need help. So eventually she was teaching, but she came. She did an ECG. I had suffered a massive, massive heart attack.
Wow.
And entire hospital staff is in my room.
Hmm.
And they're like, you know what? This is a low risk hospital. You need to go into surgery. But there's no NICU system or department for children for newborns. So you need to take your child.
Right.
Where do I take my child? I have limited family members here. Um, so I started calling coworkers and friends to come get the baby. And I went into surgery.
Wow.
Because, sometimes things that systemically sound good are not good because there's just so much unknown information.
Hmm.
That surgery, which was to implant a stent in the clogged artery, is a normal procedure for heart attacks.
Sure.
Exacerbated my condition. I ended up suffering 7 more heart attacks
Oh
and went
my
into heart
gosh.
failure. And then at heart failure, they're like, you're not accepting anything that we're doing. Things are getting worse. I
Hmm.
think you need an LVAD, which is a left ventricular assist device, which is basically an
Hmm.
artificial heart. You have no pulse, no heartbeat,
Wow.
and everything healthy that I used to do, I can't do now because it's going to just too much nutrients, too much
Right.
antioxidants, too much everything is going to kill you.
Right.
So that's when I was just like, oh my God. So while I was on the LVAD, I started experiencing TIA strokes.
Hmm.
So with the TIA strokes, they're like, well, this is supposed to be a bridge system for transplant. And you're not even you're months into the system and you're already having these strokes,
Right.
TIA strokes. So we're going to try and expedite you through transplant. I went through the expedited transplant process just to find out that I had 2% chance of accepting a donor heart
Oh my
versus
gosh.
my heart was at 3%. Now I'm on the LVAD. Now
Hmm.
the LVAD is not working. And the thing with the machine would just constantly die on me. It was fully charged, but it would just go orange like the battery's dead.
Hmm.
And I would panic. And then I would try to plug in the new extra batteries, like the backup batteries I had.
Right.
But I would feel the machine turning off inside me, like,
Hmm.
and I'm like, oh my goodness, I have seconds. So we went through the transplant, found that out. So I was determined. I'm like, you know what? If this was the reality, and I want to try everything.
Right.
Let's try if my heart has recovered because I didn't have pre-existing heart issues or medical
Yeah.
issues. And then it turned out that my heart did recover. It went from 3% to 40%.
Oh, nice.
And I'm like, oh, I was dancing. I was so full of joy.
Oh, I can
I'm like, you know
imagine.
what? Let's take this machine out. They're like, you are too excited. We cannot do that. But what we can do is turn off the machine, take out the connecting wires to the
Hmm.
pump, leave the pump inside, and see what happens. So that's where I am. I'm still seeing what happens.
Okay.
I'm in the waiting room. So that's the story.
Wow. And so through that, you found that like that taking care of yourself overall health, not just like nutrition, but like your overall health, stress and everything else is hugely important to basically being alive.
100% because, for example, usually after massive surgery like a heart-to-heart surgery,
Hmm.
you're in the CCU, and then ICU, but usually it takes days to come out of it. But because I was in such good health, the recovery process was also shorter for me, thankfully,
Right.
through those different stages. And because of the positive mental state I generally had about the fact that I did the best I could and I had been taking care of myself, and it was beyond my capacity to do anything more. I
Hmm.
really didn't have those questions of why me, why this, like I just went to the hospital to have a baby, and now all this happened to me.
Right.
So I was more of I felt like I was in a passenger seat of somebody else's life,
Hmm.
and I was just letting those emotions wash through me and just be like, I don't know, I'm gonna try, and that optimism of just not the curiosity of not knowing and just being accepting of the fact that there's nothing I could do.
Yeah.
The condition was under researched, under everything. And even the doctors most of the time didn't know what they were doing. because of the lack of research in this particular illness, which is SCAD, is spontaneous coronary dissection.
Mm-hmm.
It humbled me. I was just like,
Right.
okay, we're gonna take it day by day. And I think that's really what expedited my curiosity to wellness. Like how much more is there beyond the actual diagnosis, things that I
Right.
could do to empower myself, because there was not a lot of psychosocial support, because everyone was just focused on my heart, focused on the stroke, but
Right.
nobody was really addressing. And when I asked for like in hospital psychology department or psychiatry, they'd be like, everything you're going through sounds normal. And I was like, what? This doesn't feel normal.
Right.
How can you tell me that? So
Yeah.
that started the navigating of like, I need to find out more.
Well, and I think one of the key things you said, and granted, a lot of people may not go through something as drastic as what you went through, but we all have obstacles and hurdles that come up, and the older we get, the more common that happens with our health is that day to day. You said, just take it day to day, and when it comes to wellness in our health, I think a lot of times we put big goals out there of, oh, I need to lose X number of weight, this X number of pounds this year, or, 6 months from now, I want to be able to do this event. But it's like, okay, but we just need to focus on like getting better day by day, right? Like the mental side of it. And we lose some of that anxiety of the bigger weight of the whole picture.
100%. Yeah, I agree with you. It was really hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it,
Sure.
because you go from being somebody that is healthy, because I had been in the healthcare in different lenses. I saw like the different perspective of people that were born with a condition,
Mm-hmm.
people that
Right.
it had incidents happened, and now is they've really kind of they weaved it into their identity,
Mm-hmm.
and those that just suddenly a sudden illness, like a chronic illness hits them, they had different viewpoints of how to deal with it.
Right. And so is that like, do you think that makes a difference of like, if somebody says, I have this, whether it's a genetic disease or whatever, but like, and they identify with it to say like, I am this, I am this heart disease, whatever, versus like, I just happen to have this and I have to deal with it and figure out how to move on.
I think there's two parts. One, for the from the for the conditions that arise early on in life,
Mm-hmm.
is the world that views the illness. Is not the
Oh yeah.
person. So the person identifies with it, right? And they're like,
Right.
yes, there's things that I can do, but I still have a full functional life. But it's
Right.
society and based depending on their support system that reinforces and tells them, oh, there's a limitation.
Mm-hmm.
That limitation is not internalized until it's constantly being told to them. Oh,
Right.
did you know that you can't hear? Or did you know that you can't see? Do you know the color blue? Like these things, it's not a concept in their mind. So it doesn't
Right.
exist. But when you tell somebody that there's a lacking, then that's where the burden comes on.
Right.
And then the other individual, like in my kind of category, is what I used to do, the life
Mm.
I used to have.
Right.
And there's a constant grieving of what's been lost.
Right.
Mhm.
Yep. And that's a big piece of mental wellness and being able to move on from something that happens, whether it's a heart attack or you get diagnosed with something, or um, you lose your foot because of an accident or whatever it is. Like, and like you said, now all of a sudden I can't do these things I used to be able to do. But it doesn't. There's grieving that happens, and there's a mental overcome that you have to do. But it doesn't mean that you still can't have a very productive life and have a well life and have a good well being to your life.
Yes, and I think that's where a lot of people get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
That there isn't much of a infrastructure, I'll say, to help people fill that gap. Yes,
Right.
this happened. We cannot deny it or wish it away. It's a reality that now we have to live with. But how can we build from it.
Right.
And when I went, like, I really struggled with this recovery, with my recovery, because I was looking to fill the gap. Well, I used to be, not that I think it's a good thing, but I used to be a very active person, and worked so many things, and I just had abundance of energy,
Right.
and now I have very limited energy.
Yeah.
So for me, I would still take on things, and I would find that by noon I was zapped. Some days I
Right.
just couldn't move, and I was like, and I it angst me, and everybody else saw me as, oh, she looks well.
Hmm.
She's showing up to these locations or these events and these things, so we're going to also ask of her more. And that
Right.
just exacerbated my recovery.
Right.
It delayed a lot of things for me.
Yeah. Um, but when going through something like that, did like you're maybe limited as far as what you can do compared to before, but does it give you a different perspective on what you're trying to get out of each day?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. My wellness journey has been so awesome, because initially I struggled with those challenges,
Hmm.
but then it made me become more a conscious person of how I utilize my time,
Right.
more efficient, as well as find ways that I could do more with less. Like, for example, before, I think I would just uh, was was structured, but it wasn't very strict about it. This time slot is for this, like a really productive,
Right.
structured person.
Hmm.
Where before I was like, yeah, I have the time. If I have to stay up till 2, I'll do it. But now I'm like, okay, from 9 to this time, this is what we do. And time blocking helped.
Hmm.
Also, eh, putting in wellness activities throughout my day, and
Right.
ways to be compassionate with myself. If I'm feeling something, I don't ignore it now. I actually articulate it to myself. I tell everybody around me, I'm not having a good day today. I'm struggling. Being really open about my healing journey also helped. Like, talking about it really helps. So I do a lot of speaking engagements on self advocacy, like through the process of discovering, like, you have an illness,
Hmm.
getting multiple opinions. How do you advocate for your entire process, so
Right.
that at every single point you know that you're in charge? Like, you don't give away the power, because once you give out the power and give it away to the physicians and the professionals in the field, then you end up taking the "what this is happening to me"
Hmm.
persona, and you don't want that, and that really defeats the wellness piece, because there you're not in control of your whole being.
Right. And it sounds like you're very like vulnerable, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand how to be when it comes to their health. Is you need to be vulnerable with your support system, with your coworkers, with with those people that are around you, because it's not so much that like, oh, have pity on me because I'm having a bad day because of whatever happened, but like, no, I'm having a bad day. Like, you need to understand that I'm not as healthy as I should be today. I'm not feeling as energetic, or I'm dealing with more mental stress, or and I think when we're open about that, then it allows other people to see where we're at and potentially come along and help lift us up.
Yeah, and the very interesting about vulnerability is that we assume vulnerability happens just because of illness or something,
Hmm.
even some negative thing that happened, an incident. But the
Right.
reality is that as humans, we are vulnerable.
Right.
And we live in a society that doesn't acknowledge our vulnerability, because we build houses and things to protect us, and make us a little bit more resilient to the environments. But we are by nature vulnerable beings. And once we
Right.
acknowledge that, and are also acknowledge the fact that we are very emotional beings, like we are,
Hmm.
we're just so such a complex um, beings, that we just, once we acknowledge that, you're like, oh, okay, there is, I don't know about you, but I'm very sensitive to energy. Like, I have a positive
Hmm.
energy around me. I'm
Oh yeah,
uplifted. If somebody is sorry about that. If
that's good.
somebody is really negative or just constantly a downer, I'm just like, you're kind
Hmm.
of draining me.
Yep.
So just being vocal, and not in a negative, like, not in a bad way, but just being like, I'm sensitive to these things.
Hmm.
You telling me about the events that happened to me that got me here is not going to help me do better tomorrow.
Right.
So
Right.
let's be nurturing. I promise to be nurturing to you, and let's do that. And I feel like, when I do that, it helps. I see the other person a little bit more optimistic.
Hmm.
They're a little bit have uh, a sense of aspirations to build themselves up too, not just for me, for my own sake, but for their own sake as well.
Right. Well, and I think that's a big key is if you're vulnerable and you share that, like, hey, I'm not in the right spot right now, then that other person can go, oh man, I'm not either. Like, let's join hands, and not to like commiserate in our misery, but to say, oh well, how can I help you, lift you up? And when you do that, that you automatically get a positive feedback vibe, right? And your mental status and your emotions go up because you helped somebody else, right? That relationship is symbiotic.
Yeah, and I find that in that symbiotic process, a lot of times it leads to strength. It
Right.
doesn't deflate your strength, and it also allows you to acknowledge, yes, I'm recovered, but
Mm-hmm.
what other aspects of my wellness is not being addressed? Maybe it's financial, maybe it's social,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's I didn't address my historical context and my the dynamics in my family. And
Right.
once you're vulnerable and you address each piece, you just find out that, or at least from my experience, I find out that, oh, I know how the domino effect has onto how I feel
Mm-hmm.
and my health. Like the days that I had an argument with someone, it defeats me, and the next day I'm very lethargic. My heart is not as strong. So I think that's what I would like to send that message to everyone.
Right. And one of the things that you promote is it, which I think helps people get to the point of being vulnerable, because being vulnerable is all about courage, and you just have to have you need to find the courage to be able to say, here's how I am, here's how I feel. And one of the things you sort of mentioned is like taking yourself first, right? Like not just saying, oh, the physicians say the diagnosis is this and this, and so this is going to happen after that. Like, but I'm a person, I'm a me, I'm a being that doesn't feel the way that you say that I'm feeling. And so you talk about three stages of courageous living, and like being able to take those steps forward for yourself, right? Because that's a big piece of wellness, is standing up for yourself. And so a lot of people don't know how to do that.
Yeah,
And so how does somebody take that first step? Somebody that like you said, maybe they're a stay-at-home mom who stays at home. Like they're in their protective home, they're building, and they go and do their basic errands every day, but then they're just like they're either too anxious or too nervous or too scared to really commit to getting to know people.
honestly, I would like to start with saying that it takes time.
Right.
Courage is like a muscle that you build. It doesn't. It's not something that you can just switch a button and then like, oh, I'm a courageous person, because a lot of what we call courage is the endurance, regardless of the adversity. Your
Right.
capacity to see past the adversity and see that there's a better horizon and a sense of hope, right?
Right.
So how do you build that when you're in a very difficult circumstances, right?
Right.
And I find that for me, one of the training, like I do trainings on this, but a system that I created for myself. And the reason I created the system wasn't because of the heart issues and the things that happen to me now. Is back when I was doing healthcare aid with the pediatrics, I saw it in the different families. Some families, they were constantly grieving over the child.
Mm-hmm.
They just couldn't accept, or they would stifle the child's what the child could do based
Right.
on fear of like the adverse effects it could have, right?
Right.
So the, from that, it really put me on a search for how do we deal with this, right? And then what I found out for myself is courage is not something that
Yeah.
could be showcased, right? It's something that you do little pieces, and the day
Mm-hmm.
you need it, it shows up.
Right.
Because things that you couldn't tolerate yesterday, it's elasticity. It gives you elasticity for adversity.
Right.
And how do we build those little pieces of elasticity into our daily basis? So later on, when the band stretches beyond our capacity, we don't snap.
Right. And that's very similar to how you take the steps to improve your health, right? And your overall wellness is whether it's a nutrition journey or an exercise journey, it's taking those little bitty steps, because you're not going to make, and this, I know this is so commonly said, but it's, if somebody's gained and is overweight by, 40 or 50 pounds, they didn't gain that overnight, so they're not going to lose it overnight. And like, it took little steps to gain it. It's going to take little steps to get it off. But a lot of times we want that quick fix and we want that immediate. And it's the same thing with courage. Sometimes we think that, well, if we can't have the courage to do the big thing right now, then I don't have any courage at all, so I'm not even going to start.
Yeah, so true. And what I find, like, what helps, or what helped me, and what I help other people that I share this with, is develop identifying what your habit loops are.
Mm,
Once you identify what your habits are, then you can weave in the courage pieces in there, so
right,
that you have a reward before and after. But
right.
sometimes that itself takes a long time to figure out, because we don't know our subconscious drives.
Hmm.
We're in this automatic mode in most things. It's like driving. Once you learn to drive, you're not constantly thinking about every little lesson that you learned at
Right,
driving class, right?
right.
So once I found out, like, for me, what provided me joy was travel, which was, but now I couldn't travel because I had the LVAD right back then.
Hmm.
So I was like, okay, I'll do little things. So the day I got discharged from the hospital, I went on a day trip to the lake,
Okay.
and then I was like, what? I can still do this. It's not
Hmm.
far, but I still get to enjoy the mountains, and I get to enjoy the lake and the scenery and the fresh air. Things
Right,
I have I've been deprived of them for a year or so, and then that over time, the more I did things like that, it helped me to
right,
come into terms with, oh, my perception of my limitations are not as fixed as I thought they were. And
right.
that's where the courage came in to do a little bit more, and it helped me in my recovery.
And that's a big piece of mental wellness, is understanding the understanding the true boundaries of your limitations, right?
Yeah, sometimes
Like,
what we think is not the reality. We have a perception, a
right,
little bit sprinkled with fear, and that fear takes time to go away.
right. And and a lot of times I was thinking about this. It's so funny. I was thinking about this morning when I was in the shower. Like, I looked down and I saw my wife had bought a new kind of shampoo for her. And I was like, I've never heard of that brand before. Um, and I was just like, huh, like, I'm 48 years old. Here's a brand of shampoo. I've never heard of this company before. And they obviously have enough of a base of business to have shampoo in the store here in Waco, Texas, that my wife can go and buy. And so I'm like, there's so many ways and so many things that we could do, both from a business standpoint in that aspect, but with our life and with our health, that a lot of times we get stuck into, we're limited. I can only do this, whether it's a career or an activity, or like, I can only eat this way or I'm not healthy, or I can only, and it's like, there's so many things that we can do if we take those limits off. Just like, there's so many different ways that, or so many different companies out there that are selling shampoo. It's not like 4 companies and you have to buy from those. There's hundreds of them, and many of them we've never heard of and don't know, but we limit ourselves to thinking, oh, well, if we're not one of the top 4, we can't do this.
So true. And I think that's also goes back to the wellness recovery piece, where
Mm-hmm.
when you're recovering, yeah, maybe you did ABCD because that was so readily available to you in terms of
Mm-hmm.
marketing, and that's the stuff that you got into. But once you're challenged, you also have to challenge yourself to find creative ways. And I think that's what you're addressing, is the fact that there's creativity, and that creativity builds courage
Right.
for you to just say, I'm going to look beyond the norm,
Right.
and I will piece together what's needed from me to do well.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that that I get from what you said is like, okay, I used to travel a lot, and that's where you found your joy. And then, okay, well, I couldn't travel, but I could still go to the lake and the mountains and local travel, if you will. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people, when they think about, like wellness, a big piece of it is connecting with nature and connecting with the outside. And it's like, oh, but I live in the city and there's not, but there's parks everywhere. You don't have to be in, you don't have to go into the forest and be somewhere where it's like you're, hours away from civilization to be in nature. Like nature's all
100%.
around us, right?
Yeah, and the other thing that even regardless of what big city you're in, for the most part, there is an animal shelter. There are
Mm,
cafes that are very eco-friendly. There's
hmm.
ways that you can get that same level of joy
Right,
without going way out of the scope. Like for example, people that have mobility challenges, mountains and the lake just might not be feasible.
right,
Maybe they'll go to an indoor garden,
right.
or maybe they'll go to one of those. For me, there's a cat cafe. We just
Hmm.
go, you have to enjoy your latte, and you pet little cats, and I'm like, I love it. So
Yeah.
everybody has their own little thing that brings them little joys. So once we identify the alternative to maybe it's from A, what I wanted to do. Now I'm at E of the
Right,
some of the options, but you still find the what is something to savor and gratitude, and
right.
that's what helps in healing.
And that's something that like in your instance, like your body said, no, we're going to shut down big time and give you the time to figure this out. And not that we want everybody to go through that type of situation, but we can also just shut down for a time period, a long weekend, and truly get away and decompress and say, okay, what are the things that really bring me joy? What are the things that I really want to do that, that I need to focus on, because if I don't, I'm going to have these health issues creep up over the long term because I'm not treating myself right, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. And a lot of times we don't take that time to do that until our body says, nope, you're doing it.
Jerry, you bring a very important point. I wish I had known this
Mm-hmm.
back then, but there there is a physician here in Canada called Gabor Mate. He's now
Mm-hmm.
become a renowned author and expert in this field. But he has a book called When the Body Says No. So
Mm-hmm.
way before saying no, we don't like this. No, please don't do this. But if we're not taking the time to really hone in and listen to ourselves, how are we ever going to hear those little things?
Right.
We're not. And then the big thing happens. We say, oh my God, how could this happen to me? But we weren't listening and we couldn't see the little signals. And
Yep.
oftentimes that's where the little, like even like for individuals that are would identify themselves as workaholic,
Mm-hmm.
scheduling in times for rest that's forced, and learning to say no, because that's one thing I had a huge issue with. I never said no. Somebody
Yeah.
said something, I'd be, yeah, I'll do it. And that saying constant yes is um, devaluing or taking away from your boundaries and your self compassion, because you're giving compassion to others, but not to yourself. So once I got sick, and I read so many books and really researched this
Yeah.
as far as I could. That's really what I saw, and I'm like, oh, I could see how I was doing a lot of things. Like for example, when I was pregnant, I was working two full-time jobs. One was food manufacturing, which I was building, and a
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit. And then on top of that, I was still socially active.
Right.
Uh, my body was saying no in the sense that I was exhausted a lot, and I would just sleep long hours. But
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't listening to the fact that this is a signal that maybe you shouldn't be pushing yourself
Right.
to this extent.
And I think that's a big piece of listening to yourself. But if we don't, like you said, if we don't build that time in, if we don't time block the time to listen to ourselves on a regular basis, and it doesn't have to be the long weekend, but it could be like, okay, we do the long weekend, we figure out what our things are, and then once a week we time block in and go like, okay, am I actually doing what I know I need to be doing, or am I missing something? Because it's easy to have it in the back of your head going, oh, I know these are the things, but I'm still, like you said, a workaholic. I'm still focused on these tasks that I've got in front of me. And, oh, I know this is something I have to address. But like you said, over time, then all of a sudden your body's going to say, well, you knew these things, but you didn't do it. So here's the result.
Yeah, so true.
And so time blocking is hugely, and that's what I try to tell people, even in their corporate jobs, like you've got to, I know your boss may not like it initially, because it's like, why are you time blocking an hour to sit in your office and do nothing? Apparently do nothing, like you're not working towards the business, but you're working towards yourself, which if you do that enough and you get in the habit of it, you're going to be far more productive on the other side.
The how we utilize time right now is not efficient. So time blocking gives you accountability of I do ABCD, I take a break, rejuvenate, and then I can sprint again and get more done.
Right. And it's better for your mental health as well, because you're able to, as I've told one of my clients, I'm like, when you have those things that pop up in your head and you're like, oh, I'm doing something else, but then this pops up in my head, like make sure you have a pad of paper, write it down. Because when you write it down, your brain can say, oh, I've already got it over there. I'm not going to forget about it now. 100%. So I don't have to keep thinking about it, because it's that constant back and forth that mentally is the stressor that I think everybody deals with, that doesn't know how to deal with properly.
It's the inner critic.
Yes.
You have to quiet down that inner critic that's telling you that you're not doing enough. Yep. And once you find a way to address it, that say, no, I am. Thank you for the little voice, but I'm doing well. I've got things and systems in place. It makes it easy for you to focus on the things that are necessary.
Right. And one of the other things that you have on a statement that you have on your website that I really like, and is it says, wellness matters because you matter. And like, that's a belief that we need to truly internalize, right? Because you're not going to take care of yourself if you don't realize that you matter.
So true. So true. I really had to go through that because I was just so focused on, if I did ABCD, I'm going to get this reward, right? I was reward driven, but I wasn't value driven. And I think once you're value driven, you're like, I value me and I value everybody around me. So how can I be the best me at all times? We just take care of yourself.
Right. And I think that's a big key, and that's, as I started my business and have tweaked different things, because, you start going along and you're like, oh, I didn't like this, I'm going to tweak this or tweak that and go in a little bit different direction. But it's trying to help people understand that, like, it's not selfish to take care of yourself first. It's actually selfish to not take care of yourself first, because you're going to hurt yourself in the long run. And then you're going to wind up being like the person that everybody has to care for, because you can't care for yourself anymore.
Yes, it's your duty to take care of yourself. And we're not taught that.
Right.
And I think that's something we have to teach ourselves. And by teaching ourselves, because that new muscle of saying that, yeah, I have a duty to myself to do these things, it takes a lot of courage, because we've been taught so much to be self-sufficient, resilient, and a go-getter. Right. Mm-hmm. And when you're like, yeah, I'd want to be those things, but I have to take care of myself, and I have my needs are slightly deviating from this call of objectives that I've been given. You realize it takes courage, and that's where the mental resilience has to come in and say, stand up and self-advocate and say, I need this. It's not an option. It's not a negotiable thing.
Mm-hmm. And you have to get to the point where you realize, like we talked about before, that it's like you take it one day at a time, and day by day. And a lot of times we think, oh, but I've got to get all these things done, because unless there's a deadline that's like really hard and fast, and like, which is really, we put a lot of deadlines on ourselves, but there's really few that are like, if you don't do it by this date, there's no recourse. You're done. We get taught that system in school, but when you get out in the world, it's not usually that way. in most places. And so it's like, okay, well, what am I putting off on my health that I need to do today because I'm stressed about something else that I have to do for somebody else?
So true. I completely agree with you.
And so when we look at like, if this has struck a chord with somebody and they're like, okay, I want to hear more from Sudi. I want to hear more of her story. I want to connect with her. Um, I want her to help me through some of my challenges. How does somebody connect with you and follow you?
Honestly, through my website, be
Okay.
best also on Instagram. It's Wellness Rain and the number 8, because I think our wellness is infinitely needed. It's not something we do for a period of time and we
Mm,
forget about it. We need to be continuously conscious of how we can better nurture ourselves. So
right.
yeah, and I would love to hear from your audience. And honestly, I'm not here. I'm not somebody that assumes to know all the answers. But what I'm really
Hmm.
good at is helping people navigate to get
Hmm.
to the uh, core questions that are necessary and piecing together the experts and the data and the research that could help them build what they need. So I'm more of
Mm,
a toolkit. I'll give you the tools and we're going to build it together.
I love that because it's so far and few between what things that actually have a concrete answer and a concrete like, 2 + 2 = 4. But like there's so many things that you or I can't necessarily answer for somebody else, but we can give you the ways to, and that's one of the reasons I have this podcast. Like I'm trying to give people ways to find their own answers
Yes,
because
100%.
that's far
Especially
more
now,
valuable. Go ahead.
especially with the pandemic.
Hmm.
And right now, we're going through a healthcare human resource crisis,
Hmm.
and so much shifts are happening in healthcare that if you don't put yourself first and you're not constantly advocating for your own personal needs, more likely that it's going to not be addressed fully.
Right. Yeah. It's going to be very tough um, to be able to navigate in and not come out on the other side of it going like, well, how did I get myself in this situation? Because I don't feel healthy. I don't feel cared for. And now I'm struggling to find a doctor that's going to listen to me. And I'm far worse off than I was before. Um, so if you don't go into those initial, which really starts with the preventative side of figuring out who you are, what you need to take care of. But then when you have those scares come up, to be able to say, no, I either need a second opinion, or can you show me the data? Can you show me the research? Can you show me what is all pointing that this is the actual correct way to do this?
100%. Because what we're finding out is that a lot of health research that is done never gets reaches the public. It
Right.
sort of just gets stored away. It gets forgotten, and then we have like things that happen like that happened to me where is a rare condition, is under researched,
Hmm.
and the systemic process of treatment is not effective for everybody.
Right.
Like you have a heart attack, put a stent in. That's really automatic process, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't take account to the person's historical context, their genetic makeup, their particular stressors, socioeconomic conditions. So later on, how do you get better when all these things didn't get filled?
Right. Yep. Very true. Um, well, Sudi, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. We're running a little low on time, and you gave us I'll put your website in the show notes so people can get a hold of you. Um, but is there anything else that you would want to say to my audience about taking that first step in addressing their wellness?
Oh, yeah, oh yes. I think the one thing I would say is the first thing that anybody could do is every time there's a stressor that comes up, write it down. Because
Mm,
over time, you'll see a pattern. And once you see the pattern, we can create a systemic process of how to address them permanently.
that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, that's so true. Because if you write it down and it's the same thing, that's the same, whether it's the same thing or the same area of your life where those stressors keep coming up, then you can address like, oh, well, why am I putting myself in this situation every time to have these stresses? Is it necessary? Do I need to figure out a different way to do it? That's really good.
Thank you, Jerry. I really enjoyed this podcast interview today.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sudi.